A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. I am so glad that you are a part of the program today. Coming up, we're going to delve into this piece at the Atlantic. It's kind of about police reform. It's more about reforming the ability, more like ending the ability of American citizens to keep and bear arms. But before we get to that, I do have to say, if the bags under my eyes are a little bit more noticeable than usual, it's because I got up bright. I don't have it bright and early. I got up dark and early this morning, about 3:30 this morning, so I could fill in on WMAL in Washington, D.C., Mornings on the Mall. Vince was off today, so I had the chance to fill in, and it was great. I had a great time talking and hanging out with all the WMAL folks, but I also had the opportunity to talk with a gun control advocate. Well, kind of a gun control advocate. I had the opportunity to talk with the mayor of Alexandria, Virginia, about a gun control ordinance that is going to be voted on, and spoiler alert, it's going to pass tomorrow. This will restrict the ability to lawfully carry or even transport firearms in city buildings, including City Hall, libraries, public parks, rec centers, community centers, as well as public streets. If there are streets that are closed off for a festival, then those streets, as well as adjacent streets, would be closed to the ability to lawfully carry a firearm. Yeah, now I didn't have as much time as I would have liked with the mayor, but we did have a couple of interesting exchanges. You know, he talked about how 20 years ago Alexandria had these laws on the books, but because the Republican-controlled legislature at the time ended the ability of localities to set their own gun control laws, that these laws then went off the books. And so really, you know, it's just a return to the status quo. So I asked the mayor what happened when those laws went off the books 20 years ago. Did we see a huge increase in violent crime taking place in libraries and public parks and, you know, the City Hall there in Alexandria when people were legally allowed to carry their firearms there? And the answer, of course, is no. The mayor said, well, you know, it's not about any individual crime or even really about crime statistics. It's about what the residents of Alexandria want, he said. Okay. Well, if the residents of Alexandria want to do something that's unconstitutional, they probably shouldn't be able to do that. And this will be a legal question that will be decided. But beyond the constitutionality of the measure, one of the other questions I asked the mayor is, okay, so the residents of Alexandria want this. We also know that the residents of Alexandria, by and large, want police reform. They want depolicing efforts to take place in the city. So can you guarantee that there's not going to be a disproportionate impact with these new gun control laws? Laws that could send somebody to jail for a year for a nonviolent possessory offense, simply having a firearm where the city of Alexandria says you can't be there with your firearm. Can he guarantee that there will not be a disproportionate impact among black and brown gun owners in Alexandria? And again, the mayor could not. He said, well, you know, we've done some research. We don't believe that that'll be the case, but really not a good answer, considering that, you know, we have seen around the country, in New York City, for example, with their gun court in Brooklyn, about 70% of those who are showing up in gun court charged primarily with simply possessing a firearm without a license in New York City. That's a felony level offense, by the way, in New York City. About 70% of those individuals are young black men without any serious criminal history whatsoever. And yet the city of New York turns them into felons, sends them to prison for years at a time, simply for possessing a firearm without a license, which, by the way, is not even a crime in more than a dozen states around the country and is a misdemeanor level offense in many, many more states. So I got to tell you, I wasn't all that impressed with what I heard from the mayor of Alexandria, Virginia. Now, again, there's no chance that this ordinance does not pass tomorrow. It will pass on Saturday. And there'll be other jurisdictions around the state of Virginia that will also put similar ordinances in place because the state has empowered them to do so as part of Ralph Northam's anti-gun agenda. But I don't think it's going to do anything to reduce crime. I don't think it's going to do anything to really make people feel better once these statistics start coming out about how these laws are being enforced. In fact, I think a lot of the progressive-minded Virginians who right now back these proposals are probably going to be feeling pretty bad about how this law gets enforced and what the consequences really are. Now, before we get to this Atlantic article that I mentioned just a moment ago, we do have a word for you from our sponsor. The Trump campaign has a special offer just for you. President Trump wants to meet you. It'll be the first opportunity that he's had to meet with American patriots like you since the country started reopening. His team will cover the flight, hotel, give you VIP access for yourself and a guest. President Trump will even take a picture with you. How about that? All you have to do is text ENGAGE to 88022 today for your chance to meet President Trump. Again, that's ENGAGE, ENGAGE, to 88022 to enter to win this contest and join President Trump in the fight to keep America great for 4 more years. Paid for by Donald J. Trump for President, Incorporated. Now let's get to this Atlantic article, shall we? This is by Derek Thompson. Take a look at the headline: The Overlooked Rule of Guns in the Police Reform Debate. Something he says is weirdly absent from the general discussion about police violence in America, the weapon most commonly used to inflict it. Yes. See, I've been writing quite a bit about Bearing Arms about how I think the left is going to actually have to ultimately make a decision. Do they want police reform? Do they want to defund police? Do they want to abolish police? Or do they want gun control? Because every gun control law that is put on the books by gun control advocates requires policing, requires enforcement of that law at the point of a gun, quite frankly. And Derek Thompson's argument is that, well, we need to get rid of the guns, all of them, but how we actually go about doing that, Derek Thompson doesn't really explain. Let's delve into this article just a little bit. He says, let's begin with the simplest fact. Life is more dangerous in the presence of firearms, period. He says a 2013 study of U.S. states in the American Journal of Public Health found that for each percentage point increase in gun ownership, the overall firearm homicide rate increased by 0.9%, controlling for other factors. The correlation between gun availability and violent crime is statistically significant at every level of income. More money can spare Americans from the material and psychological ravages of poverty, but it is not by an exception from the deadly social physics of guns. So let's talk about that study for a second. According to that study, for every percentage increase in gun ownership in this country, violent crime goes up almost the same percentage point, 0.1% different, right? Is that true? Is that accurate? Does Derek Thompson even buy this? I'm not sure, because just a couple paragraphs later, Thompson writes, quote, today's warrior cop training is inappropriate as violent crime has declined by more than 70% since 1993. But perhaps some police paranoia comes from the fact that the U.S. has added twice as many guns as people since the mid-1990s. Okay, wait a second. So more guns, according to this study, equals more violent crime. But according to the crime statistics, we've added a lot of guns in society since the mid-1990s, and violent crime has dropped by more than half. In fact, violent crime has dropped by nearly 75%. So one of those things can't be true. More guns equals more crime, or more guns while crime has declined. I'm going to go with the statistics as opposed to the study, just because I think it's a little bit more difficult to mess with the crime stats than it is to control for variables, and all of a sudden you come up with, oh my gosh, look, when people buy guns, violent crime goes up. That's actually not been the experience in the United States for the past several decades. Again, we've actually witnessed one of, if not the biggest drop in violent crime in our nation's history, at a time when not only have the number of new firearms owned by Americans soared, but you also have seen the expansion of the right to carry. In the mid-1990s, we had a few states that had adopted shall-issue right-to-carry laws. Now, more than 40 states across the country have shall-issue right-to-carry laws. 15 states are constitutional carry states. You can carry a firearm as long as you're legally allowed to own it. You don't require a license from the government to exercise your right to keep and bear arms. And again, violent crime has continued to drop, even as those laws got put on the books. So I don't buy Derek Thompson's assertion that more guns equals more crime, because that has not been the American experience. The American experience has actually been more guns and less crime over the past 2.5 decades. But Derek Thompson is committed to his idea, so he's got some suggestions as to where we go from here. He says, quote, "These solutions are socially and politically improbable, but perhaps no more improbable than abolishing the police. They could begin with banning guns of war, requiring universal background checks, and instituting national red flag laws to keep guns from potentially dangerous people." All right, there's more to this quote we're going to get to in just a second. But let's focus in on his policy prescriptions for a second, right? Derek Thompson says banning guns of war, which you and I would call modern sporting rifles or semi-automatic rifles, or guns that are not actually used in war, but scare people like Derek Thompson and a lot of Americans who don't know much about these firearms, easily confused. So why not call them weapons of war? It makes more people want to ban them. All right, so we're going to ban the most commonly sold rifle in America today, according to Derek Thompson, requiring universal background checks. How's that going to be enforced? I mean, for that matter, how's the gun ban going to be enforced? If we're depolicing, if we're abolishing the police, or if we're just simply defunding the police, who enforces these laws? It's a particularly good question, by the way, when it comes to red flag laws, which Derek Thompson also mentions. I wrote a piece at Bearing Arms about this, actually just a day or two ago, how gun control groups are continuing to push for red flag laws that have no mental health component to them whatsoever. Now, I've been saying for over a year that red flag laws are gun control bills masquerading as mental health bills. And that's the case. So here you have Derek Thompson, oh, we got to do something about the police. We got to do something about police reform. The police don't need to be militarized. They don't need to be weaponized. Well, what happens when a red flag order takes place? Virginia, our red flag law goes into effect July the 1st. And there is no room for mental health professionals anywhere in the process of acquiring or executing an extreme risk protection order. As a matter of fact, the words mental health do not even appear in the legislation. In Massachusetts, when they were debating red flag legislation, Jim Wallace of the Gun Owners actually told me that lawmakers specifically said, this is not a mental health bill. This is a gun control bill. Because Republicans and Second Amendment advocates had actually tried to include some sort of mental health provision in that legislation. Gun control advocates and anti-gun Democrats said no. So in Virginia, a law enforcement official has to petition a magistrate. We think that Cam might be a danger to himself or somebody else. Then the magistrate, without ever talking to Cam, decides whether or not there's a 51% chance that Cam might pose a threat to himself or others. If the magistrate decides that, 51% chance or more, then law enforcement goes and confiscates Cam's firearms. And a couple of weeks later, Cam finally gets his day in court. Cam still hasn't talked to a mental health professional, but Cam now gets to talk to the judge. If the judge says, Cam, you know what? Now that I've talked to you, I think you're okay. Cam probably will get his guns back. Might take a while. He'll probably get his guns back. If the judge says, Cam, I'm still 51% convinced that you might be a danger to yourself or others. Well, then Cam's guns stay confiscated for at least 6 months. Cam can apply to get his firearms back, but the state can also apply to extend the extreme risk protection order, in which case Cam's going to be disarmed for an indefinite amount of time because there's no limit to how many times the state can reapply to extend that extreme risk protection order. And again, no place for law enforcement. No place for mental health. Virginia has a civil commitment law. There's no reason why, if people are really concerned that somebody might be a danger to themselves or others, why they can't contact police and say, hey, I think this individual is really a danger to themselves or others. Police would come. They would then take that individual into a mental health setting where a doctor would talk to that patient and determine whether or not they actually did pose a threat to themselves or others. That, to me, seems to be not only a far more constitutional way of going about things, but when we talk about, what's fair or not, fair is a big word these days. It seems to me much more fair before you start depriving somebody of their constitutional rights because you think they might be a danger to themselves or others, that you at least have somebody talk to them other than a law enforcement officer who then takes this case to a judge. But this is what gun control advocates want. This is the system that they want. They don't want to include mental health in this bill. They don't want mental health to be a part of a red flag law. Why? A couple of reasons. One, they push gun control. So they're not in the business of pushing mental health bills. They're in the business of pushing gun restrictions. Politicians also, I think, in some cases like red flag laws because it's a cheaper option. You know, to place somebody under a 72-hour hold, that costs money. You're actually housing them for 72 hours at a time. In the state of Virginia, we are regularly running out of inpatient mental health beds. Now, politicians don't want to do anything to address that. We're not building any more facilities. We're not ensuring that people who are in crisis actually have a place to go. Nope. Instead, the cheap and easy fix, well, let's just take their guns away if we think somebody might be a danger to themselves or others. So we'll leave them their car keys. We'll leave them their gas can. We'll leave them their matches. We'll leave them sharp knives. We'll leave them pills. We'll leave them rope. We'll leave them everything else in their house. But we'll take their guns and then we'll wipe our hands and think that we have somehow solved something. That's what Derek Thompson's pushing for, even while he talks about the need for police reform. Let's finish off this quote here. Thompson says, these measures might sound small bore compared to the challenge before. I mean, I don't think banning the most commonly owned firearm in America today, or commonly owned rifle in America today, is a small bore thing. I think, universal background checks are largely unenforceable. Red flag laws, again, I just went through the problems there. But he says it can still make a difference. Deborah Azriel, he says, also the Harvard Injury Control Research Center has found that 40% of gun owners acquire their most recent firearm without a background check. There may be few issues that straightforwardly unite police reformers and police unions, but reducing the social toxin of gun prevalence, especially in high crime areas, ought to be at the top of that list. Well, first of all, I don't know where Deborah Azriel got that number that 40% of firearm sales went through a background check, but I'd be very curious because even the ATF has backed off of that statistic. But again, more importantly, so let's put a universal background check law in place. Again, we've got one going into effect in Virginia on July the 1st. Who enforces that? Who enforces that law? Law enforcement, right? I mean, that's sort of the obvious answer. Law enforcement enforce every law. How do they enforce this? How do police determine proactively that somebody's about to sell a firearm without a background check? They don't. They don't. Which is why even in states like Washington, which have had universal background check laws on the books for years, there have only been a handful of people that have even been charged because this is a largely unenforceable law. Oh, it sounds great for gun control advocates, non-gun owners. Oh, yeah, you should go through a background check. Okay, well, how do you ensure that that takes place? How do you ensure compliance? And by the way, do we really think that criminals are going to comply with this? Of course not. All of these laws are aimed at legal law-abiding gun owners, which Thompson actually kind of obliquely acknowledges later on in his quote where he says, reducing the social toxin of gun prevalence. So what that means is we need fewer legally owned guns in the hands of fewer legal gun owners, and maybe that'll have some sort of trickle-down effect on violent criminals. I don't think so. You know, if we really want to reduce violent crime, you can't arrest your way out of the problem, which is exactly what Derek Thompson is suggesting. Even while, he's supporting the idea of police reform, he wants to empower law enforcement to go after people and throw them in jail for nonviolent possessory offenses that, quite frankly, in many cases, are protected by the Second Amendment to our U.S. Constitution. If you want to reduce violent crime, if you want a safer society, if you want safer cities, it has to start with a focus on those who are actually committing the violent crimes. I mean, it's pretty basic, right? And again, in cities across the country, we've actually seen programs that have been incredibly effective at doing this. Things like Project Ceasefire, which first popped up in Boston in the late 1990s, reduced the homicide rate by more than 50% without a single gun control law being added to the books. And in fact, gun control laws make no difference because we're talking about individuals who are well known to authorities They're well known to the community that they live in. They're certainly well known to their victims. And yes, many of them have criminal records that prohibit them from legally owning a firearm in the first place, or they're underage and they're not legally allowed to possess a firearm in the first place. How do we deal with those folks? Well, again, we're not talking about a statistically large percentage of any given city's population. Less than 1% of a city's population. A city the size of Chicago, you may be looking at 5 to 10,000 people who are responsible for driving the violence in that city. It may be as low as 2,000 people. Most cities, we could be looking at, as many as 1,000, as few as a few dozen. So all of a sudden, this becomes a much more workable solution. Right now, you don't have to try to figure out, well, how do we get 400 million guns out of people's hands? Or how do we arrest every illegal gun owner? Now, all of a sudden, you start thinking about, okay, how do we identify those individuals who are the biggest threat to public safety? And by the way, those individuals who are the biggest threat to public safety quite often are also the biggest risk of being shot or killed. Perpetrators of violent crime and the victims of violent crime are often one and the same when we're talking about drug and gang violence. So how do you identify those individuals? Well, it can be done. It does require law enforcement. So I don't know if Derek Thompson is going to like that too much. But you can use resources from local law enforcement, from the district attorney's office, from the state attorney's office, or the state attorney general, and on up into the federal government. And you can collaborate with these agencies to identify the most violent offenders in any given city, the most violent gang in any given city. And you can call in those individuals because 99 times out of 100, they're already on probation for another crime. So you call them in. Under something like Project Ceasefire, when they get there and they're sitting down, across from them might be the chief of police, might be the local district attorney, might be the U.S. attorney as well. But they'll also see their parents. They may see their fifth grade teacher. They may see a local business owner or local pastor. And the message from both of those groups is the same. You will stop shooting. You will stop shooting. Law enforcement says, if you don't stop, we'll make you stop. We'll prosecute you in federal court. There will be no plea deal offered. We will put you and anybody else who continues to shoot away for as long as we possibly can. But we don't want to do that. We would prefer not to have to go to court and put you in prison for 20 years, which is where that second group of people come in. And they say, we love you. They say, we care about you. We're sick of you shooting up our neighborhood. We're sick of you making our kids scared to play outside. We're sick of the damage that you're doing to the people that we love, but we still love you. But you got to stop. And if you stop, then we can get you help. Do you need help getting your GED? We can help you with that. Do you need help with job training? We can help you with that too. We can help you turn your life around. It's not too late. We're not going to give up on you. But if you don't listen to us, you better listen to the prosecutors. You better listen to the police, because we are done with you shooting. That message, if it's backed up with teeth, if the help is there, and if the prosecution is there for those who don't stop shooting, if both of those things are in place, violent crime plummets. Without any new gun laws on the books, has nothing to do with going after legal gun ownership. It simply deals with the people who are, again, driving that violent crime, gives them an opportunity to change, puts them away if they don't, and communities can start to heal. So if Derek Thompson is really looking for ways to, reform our society, there's a far easier and more constitutional way to go about it than trying to take 400 million privately owned firearms away from American citizens. And again, he really never does explain how that would happen without law enforcement becoming even more heavy-handed and draconian than Derek Thompson already believes it to be. But, again, I'm not expecting him to change his mind, but there is certainly a much better way than going after the rights of law-abiding Americans if you want to try to tackle the issue of violent crime. All right, let's get to today's Armed Citizen story, our good deed of the day, our recidivist report. Actually, before we do that, one more reminder from our sponsor today. The Trump campaign has a special offer just for you. President Trump would like to meet you. This is going to be the first opportunity that the president has had to meet with American patriots like yourself since our country started reopening. Going to be in Tulsa, Oklahoma over the weekend for his first kickoff rally. Now, his team's getting ready to cover the flight, hotel, even give you VIP access for yourself and a guest. President Trump will even take a picture with you. All you have to do is text ENGAGE to 88022 today for your chance to meet President Trump. Again, that's ENGAGE to 88022 to enter to win this contest and to join President Trump in the fight to keep America great for 4 more years. Paid for by Donald J. Trump for President Incorporated. All right, so on to today's Armed Citizen Story, our good deed of the day, our recidivist report. We're going to start with our recidivist report from Raleigh, North Carolina, where Richard Rubalcaba has been arrested and charged with setting fires in businesses in downtown Raleigh back in the end of May. He's now actually facing federal and local charges, according to CBS 17 there in Raleigh, New York. They say that they dug into his criminal history, found that he has been arrested several times by the Raleigh Police Department on a variety of charges. History includes failure to appear, drug possession, credit card theft, carrying concealed weapons without a license, and trespass. The U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of North Carolina said Rubalcaba entered a Dollar General Express there in Raleigh, walked in and out several times, stealing items along the way. He then set fire to several items and left the store. Later that evening, surveillance cameras were recording when court documents said Rubalcaba went into a restaurant 3 different times, ripped out a cash register, tried to light a plant on fire, and placed a burning towel on a countertop. Frank Lamb, who's one of the owners of Budokai Restaurant, says, I don't know why he would do that. There's a residence above us, and the fact that he wants to start a fire, that's just crazy. There are hundreds of people living upstairs, and I don't know what's going through his mind. If this place were to catch on fire, who knows what would happen upstairs? Well, I mean, there is the possibility that Mr. Rubalcaba did not give a damn about what happened to anybody living upstairs from that restaurant. Also the possibility that Mr. Rubalcaba didn't know that there were people living upstairs, and if he had, then maybe he would have changed his ways and stayed at home and simply, watched Netflix. But I kind of doubt it. According to CBS 17, searches on Rubalcaba's social media page found several Facebook accounts under his name. Some of the pages listed history of having lived in Alaska. Records show that he is a Raleigh resident, and again, a Raleigh resident that is well known to police and law enforcement in the area. Apparently, never really been any serious consequences of Mr. Rubalcaba to this point in his life, but with the federal charges that he's now facing, that's likely about to change. Today's Armed Citizen Story from Tennessee, where an armed citizen shot a would-be robber in the parking lot of the Opry Mills shopping center. This is a retail. This is like an outlet mall. Clarksville, Tennessee, WKRN reporting that an armed citizen shot a man who attempted to rob him in the Opry Mills parking lot on Wednesday evening. Now, according to authorities, police were called to the shopping center about 7:15 in the evening. Suspect approached the victim with a revolver and demanded his stuff. Give me all your stuff. Victim then reportedly pulled out a handgun of his own in self-defense, shot the suspect in the knee. Suspect managed to hobble away, was found in front of the Opryland Hotel a short time later, taken to a local hospital with what's described as non-life-threatening injuries. That armed citizen, safe and sound, and not facing any charges at all. Finally, our good deed of the day from Jacksonville, Florida, where a veteran helped track down a man accused of posing as a law enforcement officer. This was a bizarre story on the streets of Jacksonville. So Derek Ball is driving down the road in Jacksonville. He's a military veteran. He sees blue flashing lights behind him. And he starts to pull over, and then he's like, something that just doesn't feel right about this. He began questioning the driver, took pictures with his phone. He said, I just noticed right off the top that these weren't regular police cars. He said the front windshield was completely black. You couldn't see in the car, at all. There were actually 2 cars that looked somewhat like undercover police cars. They drove up next to Bell. He said he heard a siren and then saw blue flashing lights coming from this car. He said, I started slowing down thinking it was a cop. So I put my hand down and I was like, are you going to stop me or not? I'm not speeding or anything. I'm just going to pull over. He said the car then pulled up beside him. He said, I threw my hand out the window and said, let me see your badge. And he didn't show me his badge, said Bell. So one of the cars speeds away. But Bell gets behind this other car, eventually takes a photo of that black Chevy Impala that he was driving. They both eventually pulled over. Bell said he got out of his car, said, stood by my truck. I'm looking at him like, get out of the car. Get out of the car, bro. So he didn't get out of the car. He then took off. Bell then flagged down police and said, I think this guy's a fake cop. And Jacksonville officers with the, actually, I guess it was deputies with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, ended up finding this Impala, took the driver into custody. 32-year-old Willie Ramp, arrested on multiple charges, including impersonating a law enforcement officer. Apparently, when he was arrested, he asked officers, will this ruin my chances of being a state trooper? Yeah. He also had 2 kids in the back seat of the car while he was doing this. Mr. Bell said that's what touched me the most because they saw their father getting arrested too. Now, the second car that Mr. Bell saw sped away. Police weren't able to locate that vehicle, so there's apparently somebody else out there that is posing as a cop. Again, if you are pulled over, you are suspicious about this, you're just, that gut instinct kicks in. You're like, I don't know that this is a real police officer. Wait until you can get to a well-lit area. You call 911 if you can and let dispatch know what's going on. Tell them where you are. They can confirm if you're actually being pulled over by a legitimate officer or not. That is probably the best way to handle that situation. But again, in the right place at the right time, subjected to a really weird experience, but able to help police actually make an arrest in this case. Derek Bell, we thank you for your very good deed. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I want to thank you for being a part of the program as well. Hope that you have a fantastic weekend. To all the dads out there, happy Father's Day. I might even get to sleep in on Sunday. And probably not, but fingers crossed. We will be back Monday. We've got a great guest coming up. I'm not going to tease it because every time I do, something happens and it falls through. So I'm not going to get specific. But I'll tell you, we've got a great guest coming up out of the state of Michigan. Not going to want to miss this. But in the meantime, thanks for being a part of the program. Be safe, be well, be free, and we'll see you soon with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company on Monday.